Thank you for joining us for the Young Leaders Society's College Planning Seminar. Planning for college is much more than filling out an application. It's an exciting and at times challenging process. Hopefully today's seminar will help make it a bit easier and less stressful with the help of today's presenter, Courtney Johnson-Benson. Courtney works as the Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at the University of Akron. Among many other things, she is a state and national award-winning college admission professional, focusing mainly on public speaking. Some of the services she provides to students of all ages includes college planning, scholarship search, college access, mentorship, personal branding, and motivational or informational speaking. We are so grateful to Courtney to help provide today's virtual session, and without further ado, I will pass it over to her.
Okay. So, among other things, I also serve as the president-elect of the Ohio Association for College Admission Counseling. So this is actually the governing body for all of our admissions counselors in the state of Ohio and all of our high school counselors as well. So I have a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the college admission process and where to find resources and how to make this as easy as possible for you. So these are just some of the topics that we're going to be discussing today. But before I get started, what I'm actually going to do, I'll do this after I finish. So I have a whole packet of information that's hosted on my Google Drive that I'll drop in the chat before we conclude today. So it has basically anything and everything you would need to kind of start your process or continue with your process. And I'll also drop my contact information in the chat for you as well. So we're going to talk about college characteristics, academic preparation, ACT and SAT tests, which look very different this year moving forward than they have in years past. Collecting information from colleges and definitely scheduling that campus visit, which again look very different this year. And then applying for admission and developing a plan to finance your education. And then finally, what it looks like when you're starting to finalize those plans. So college characteristics that I always tell students to consider, major in educational programs, because that is really the only reason that you should start your search with a college of your choosing. So you really have to be keyed into what programs look like, what do you want to major in, and what that career outcome may be, because that can definitely determine where you choose to look throughout your college search. Location and size of school. I always tell students, you know, if you're looking for a small rural liberal arts institution, but you want to major in business, you might want to rethink that location and size of school because you want to be accessible to industry, right? So thinking about those things as well. Of course, cost and financial assistance, type of school and degrees offered. So typically, if you're going to go to a school for engineering, you want that to be their top major. You want that to be something that they do very well. Admissions policies, college affiliation and accreditation, which a lot of students don't always think about, but this is very, very important. And I'll talk about how that plays into maybe transferring or perhaps going into specific programs that require accreditation. And then campus activities and support services. So options after high school. Of course, you have community colleges, trade and technical school, which typically are maybe a year. Community colleges typically are 2-year degrees, so associate degree programs. We have public colleges and universities, private colleges and universities, and something that has come up a lot more this year than others is a gap year. And I'll kind of walk through all of those options as well. So community colleges. Some of the advantages of going to a 2-year community college, of course, they do have a lot of technical degrees because that's really what they specialize in. You can transfer degrees and coursework to just about any other 4-year institution within that state. So here in Ohio, we're very lucky to have College Credit Plus options, which make it very easy to transfer your coursework from a 2-year to a 4-year public or private institution. Partnership programs. So for instance, there's a lot of high school technical programs that partner with colleges and universities to help students get access to not only support, but those additional classes that are going to support, help support them when they get on their campus. Cost and proximity to home. It's a community college. Like literally, it was built to help educate the community. So it's going to be close to home. The cost is going to be very affordable. And one thing that a lot of students don't consider is this idea around community colleges not being as prestigious as 4-year public and private institutions. Community colleges, a lot of students go either to complete their degree program or start their education. So there's no shame in taking advantage of some of the awesome institutions that we have here, not only in Stark County, but the state of Ohio. And if you are interested in community colleges, there's actually a full website, not only for community colleges, but also for your public and private institutions that basically give you a rundown of everything that we have to offer here in Ohio. So public institutions, there are 13 in Ohio. And as I stated before, there is that website that you can go to that basically gives you all the information that you need if you're only looking at public universities. So the advantages of going to a public university, they have a broad range of programs. So typically a public university is going to have anywhere from 150 to over 300 degree programs to choose from. They have a broad range of student life experiences and opportunities. So the larger a campus population is, the more opportunities you're going to have to engage in different student service type organizations, different clubs and things of that sort. And then diverse types of institutions to choose from. So because publics are peppered all around the state of Ohio, you do have some schools that are very urban centered, like your Ohio State and your CSU and your University of Akron. But then you also have some publics that are not. So OU is in Athens, and then you have BG, which is up near Toledo in Bowling Green, Ohio. So those are things that you definitely want to take into consideration when you're looking for institutions. So maybe more selective and moderately selective. So a selective public institution might be a Miami of Ohio or an Ohio State. Some that are moderately selective might be Kent State and the University of Akron. So we have some selection things that we will go by as far as admitting students, but they're not highly selective. And then, they're open, they're large, medium, small. So open enrollment means all you need to do is complete your Ohio graduation requirements and you can apply and be admitted. So typically those institutions, there's a few that really are still open enrollment truly, and one of them would be Toledo. So some additional advantages to considering a public institution is affordable tuition. Because it is a public institution and we have to abide by the higher education chancellor of the state of Ohio, they actually determine if we can raise our tuition and fees. So we have to stay open and accessible by way of being a public institution. Why, you ask? Well, because taxpayer money goes into providing support for public institutions. So it would be a disservice to students if we were highly selective. We want to be as open and accessible to all students all over the state of Ohio. And financial assistance. So typically there are merit and need-based opportunities at public institutions for scholarship. Ability to transfer credits from a community college. So I hit on this before with having College Credit Plus opportunities that you're able to transfer very, very easy. Or if you're starting at a community college and want to transfer, it is also very easy to make that happen. And then opportunities for graduate and professional studies. So this is kind of what sets apart our community colleges from our four-year public institutions. Typically, you're going to find a graduate school, perhaps a professional school. So some schools that have graduate programs are Kent State, University of Akron, CSU, also might have a law school. And then you have University of Toledo that actually has a medical school. So those are some of the advantages of going to a larger institution, is it's going to offer a little more when it comes to experiential learning because of the nature of having those programs on campus. And then of course, regional campus options. We have one right here in Stark County, Kent State Stark. So that's what we would call a regional. So we have those all over the state of Ohio. We actually have some regionals where you can start and live at a regional. So one would be like OSU Mansfield, where they actually have housing, and that directly feeds into Ohio State main campus. And then of course, major sports programs. So typically your large public institutions are going to be Division I and Division II. So if that's something that you want to engage in, either because of athletics and you are an athlete, or just for added fun, that's something to consider as well. So private colleges and universities. So there is a website that has all of their information too. So one of the benefits of a small private college is that it is small. So you're going to have a smaller campus and smaller class sizes. So typically that faculty to student ratio is going to be very low, where you might have a 18-to-1 at a public institution. At a private institution, you might actually have like 11 to 1. So your class sizes are going to be fairly small. And then opportunities for student leadership. Yes, you have these at larger institutions, but it's kind of like the big pond, small fish, where at a private institution, it's a little pond, big fish. So it's a lot easier to kind of stand out from the crowd when it comes to leadership opportunities. And then, of course, strong financial aid and scholarships. So because public institutions basically get money from the state through taxes and different stipulations, it is very affordable tuition wise, but private institutions typically rely on endowments or fundraising or money that's given to the institution. So you'll find that tuition and fees are a little bit higher, but so are their scholarship options for students. And then, of course, a wide range of locations, affiliations, and costs. So that's something I always encourage students to consider too. Do you want to go to a religiously affiliated institution? Do you want to go to a very small private institution that is very rural, like Kenyon College, which I love Kenyon, it's gorgeous, but it was not for me. It's in the middle of nowhere. But for a student, that might be an experience that they really want to have. Like you have to live on campus all 4 years. It's like a requirement. So those are things that you want to consider when you're looking at private institutions. So getting into college, is it hard? Yes. Some colleges are harder than others. I feel like if it wasn't hard, everybody would go. So it is a little bit of a challenge making that next step in your education, but we're going to go through all the types of admissions that you can choose as far as institutions you're looking for. So open admission. So basically all students are accepted. So these are going to be our community colleges. There are a few open enrollment public institutions, but even still they have some type of stipulation when it comes to admissions materials. So Stark State College and Cuyahoga County Cuyahoga Community College up near Cleveland are going to be these types of institutions. And then selective admissions, you might be required to have a specific GPA minimum. You might also be required to submit an ACT or SAT, and we'll talk a little bit about test blind and test optional too, since that's like a hot button issue this year. And then you might also have to submit an essay or even do an interview for specific programs. So examples of these selective admissions institutions here in Ohio are going to be the University of Akron, Bowling Green State, and then of course the College of Worcester, which is a private institution. So competitive admissions, this is kind of where things start to ratchet up a notch when it comes to admissions. So the space is going to be limited. It's typically at competitive admissions institutions, they have an idea of what they want their class to look like. So they say, we're going to recruit 300 students this year. And after we have 300, that's it. So you're actually competing for spots at that campus. High school coursework needs to be selective as well. So they're looking to see if you have AP, honors, things of that sort, maybe international baccalaureate. They're looking at test scores, extracurricular involvement is where that comes into play. So it's very individualized. Typically, you have admissions folks like myself reading each and every application. So it's very selective and carefully reviewed. So institutions in the state of Ohio that are competitive admissions are going to be Case Western University, Oberlin College, and of course, Harvard University, and then like New York University. And then some competitive majors, nursing, architecture, engineering, and business across the board, of course, like pre-med and pre-dental. So all those pre-professional degree programs are definitely going to be the most competitive majors where you might have to interview to get into a pre-med program. You might have to have a certain GPA in all of your sciences and your math-based courses in high school. So those are things you want to definitely keep in mind as well. So admissions offices basically evaluate your student transcripts and test scores if they're required. So they're looking at, again, those advanced placement courses, if available, and College Credit Plus. They're also looking at which courses you take your 11th and 12th grade year. So this is where I always tell students, don't coast your 12th grade year. Don't take all the easy classes, at least take one or two challenging courses. Not only because it just, to an admissions counselor, I'm like, oh, they just gave up. But also, if you think about it, you want to make sure you're as prepared as possible moving into that fall semester. So what happens if you have your last accelerated or maybe one of your toughest math courses or science course, it's been a whole year since you have that material if you don't take something your senior year. So guess what happens when you're in your intro to chem or anatomy physiology, your first year of your freshman semester, then you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't had this type of math in almost a year. So you're actually setting yourself up for success that first year by taking some competitive courses or some pretty hard, not all coast through your last senior year courses, just to make sure you're prepared. And then of course your high school profile. So not all students will submit this along with their application. Some colleges require it. So basically the high school profile is going to give you an idea of what type of school you're coming from, right? So what does your school offer as far as advanced placement courses? What's the college placement rate? What's the graduation rate? These are things to help admissions professionals get to know your high school without talking to someone from your high school. So we get all the statistics on the high school profile. So ACT and SAT testing. So this is the one thing, one of the good things to come out of this craziness that is COVID, is a lot of schools are test optional or test blind. So for me, I was not a great tester and I still am not. It's like my fear. I don't like it. Yeah, it is not fun. But the bonus is because so many students were not able to take the ACT or SAT due to the coronavirus, they actually have an opportunity to apply test optional or test blind. But just so you have an idea of what those test scores look like or tests look like. So ACT is definitely multiple choice, English, math, reading, science. Ohio is very much an ACT state. A lot of people take that. SAT is something you want to look into, especially if you're looking at those competitive admission programs, either in state or out of state. So highly selective institutions will look at the SAT too, which covers completely different things than the ACT and SAT. So the SAT too might cover biology, world history, foreign language. So these are for those highly selective institutions, typically Ivy League. So test optional and test blind. They are two completely different things. I find a lot of students getting them confused, but really understanding the difference between them is crucial when you're looking at institutions to apply to. So test optional, students can choose whether or not to submit the SAT or ACT for consideration within their admission. Test blind means you can submit them or might be required to submit them, but they do not weigh heavily in the decision to admit you to their university. So test blind schools will typically ask for a test score just because of placement. So they will utilize what you get in those sub-score areas like math, reading, science, that kind of thing. And they basically use it just to place you in your introductory courses your freshman year, but they do not use it as a factor in your admission decision. Test optional, you don't even have to submit it. So we're not even looking at it. So those are things that you want to consider too. When it comes to test optional and test blind, you also want to ask very crucial questions like, will I still be considered for merit awards if I don't submit a test score? Will I still be considered for competitive programs like an honors program or perhaps a direct admit program if I don't submit a test score? Those are really important questions to ask because it could make the difference between you applying at that institution or perhaps another that might not consider them. So college information sources. This is super important. Of course, I'm a resource. I'll make sure that you have my contact information. Don't feel like you can't reach out to me just because I work at Akron. I do this all the time. So I'm just really about providing a resource to students to help them through their college search process. So internet and websites, of course, are like the number one thing that people utilize. But lately, a lot of students have actually been going to social media to find out information about different institutions. So I encourage you to do that as well. Definitely engaging with college representatives at college fairs. So tomorrow, if you are not busy, there's actually a national college fair. So there's over 450, I think, colleges that will be represented tomorrow online. You can register for free. The website is right there. And it runs essentially almost like 9 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night because it is a national fair for students across the nation. So that's an excellent way for you to get some resources and get some face time with some of those schools that you haven't heard about. We've actually had students do live campus tours within those programming options too. So it's a great way to get to know a college and know several colleges quickly. So typically there's like a half hour to an hour presentation per college that you can take advantage of. And then, of course, we do have counselors and teachers that are a great resource for students too. Parents, students, and alumni. So connecting with folks that have gone to the institution that you're thinking about, they would be willing to share their experience. This is always a great way to get some additional information. So college and university visits. So as I stated before, very different now than it has been in the past. Majority of our schools here in Ohio are hosting some type of in-person visit, but it might be on a very, very limited basis. So I know that Toledo is hosting visits, the University of Akron is hosting visits, and several other institutions are, but we are limited to like 10 people total. So we do have those options. Everyone's taking advantage of getting on campus when they can, but right now it might not be an option for a lot of students. So I always encourage you to go to college visitation websites to see what type of virtual programming they have, to see if you can get a virtual campus tour, to see if you can find out about your major related information virtually as well. And then it doesn't hurt to ask. So I actually had a student that came up from Columbus with their family, and we did an individual tour because they didn't really feel comfortable being in a group. And I had them meet with everyone individually as well. So we were able to keep our distance, but it was great for the student, especially because they were 2 hours away, to really get an idea of what campus was like. So don't be afraid to ask and see if there are those types of opportunities at the colleges that you're looking for. So I kind of went through most of this, like scheduling an interview, perhaps sitting in with the class, which is not an option. So one other thing too, if you are doing campus visits, typically you're not allowed to see a residence hall. So looking online for those types of resources as well. And typically in a normal year, there might be some type of overnight option for visits, perhaps a bus tour, large open house, which we're not having as well. But these are all in regular times options for students to visit colleges. So applying for admission. So the first thing you want to do is narrow down your choices. Typically, and this is crazy to think about, but I just saw the statistic yesterday. Students start with like 20 colleges that they're looking at. I'm like, that's insane. So a lot of students start with about 20, narrow it down to 10, and then they have their short list of about 3. So I don't know if I would start with 20, maybe start with 10, narrow down your short list of 3 to 5, and then 2 and visit 2. So that just kind of gives you an idea of options that you have. I always encourage students to at least look at a private, a public, 2-year, 4-year, look at the distance, tuition, things of that sort. You have to do that comparison. And I actually have materials that I'll share with you at the end of this session that allow you to do that comparison too. So it's like a college comparison sheet. So review the college admission test requirements. So do they super score? Do they require the ACT or SAT? Are they test optional or test blind? And then know the application fees and deadlines. This is crucial because a lot of colleges have multiple deadlines. So they might have early action, early decision, early priority scholarship consideration. We're not here to confuse you, I promise, but everyone operates differently. So that's why it's really important on the student to make sure they're keeping up. And then what are the scholarship requirements? So do they have merit award scholarship? What GPA are they looking for? Do they require a test? These are all things that you want to keep in mind. Excuse me. So applying for admission. Regular admission is basically students submit their applications by a specific date, usually between November and January. So this is majority of institutions. Rolling admission. So there's only a few that are rolling admission, Akron being one of them. I want to say CSU and Toledo are also rolling admission. So it's very common at large state institutions, but you want to adhere to some of the deadlines that aren't specific to admission. So technically rolling admission means you can apply at any time during the year, which is fine. But if you're applying late in the game, you're going to miss out on some scholarships and things of that sort. So even though you can apply at any time, it is still important to have an idea of what you want to take advantage of at that institution. Because every year never fails. I have a student that applies like June 30th. And I'm like, that's great, you're admitted, but you missed a scholarship deadline for a lot of extra money that you missed out on. So those are things that you want to keep in mind. And then open admission. So this is community college and some four-year institutions. So all they require is your final high school transcript. So early admissions options. So this is where it can get a little confusing, and you definitely do not want to confuse early admissions options, trust me. So early decision is basically you're agreeing to attend that school if you're accepted, and you cannot apply to any other college or university. So this is what we call binding. That means after you're offered admission and you accept it, you are binded to go to that university. And if you change your mind, you will no longer be offered admission again. So you can't flip flop. Like, you have to know, this is where I want to go, this is where I want to be, and this is where I'm going to enroll. So that's early decision. So you do want to ask if early decision is binding or non-binding. Non-binding means you do have time to go back on your offer. Binding means once you go back on your offer, you will not get an opportunity to have an offer again. So those are typically those highly selective institutions. Now, early action. It's kind of like early decision, applying to your top choice school, but if you decide that you don't want to go to that school later on, you're not bound to accept that decision. So this offers you a little bit of leeway, but it also gives you a lot of opportunity by way of scholarships and early consideration, because it is early action. So these usually occur somewhere like during the beginning of November. And then deferred admission. So this means that you've applied to an institution, you've been admitted, but you want to take maybe a gap year, or what we call a COVID year, because we actually did have students take a COVID year. I know it's funny, but it's like legit. So, or a COVID semester. So you can actually defer your admission. A lot of students that do this are maybe going into the military, so they need to defer their start date to like a semester or a year later. A lot of students are perhaps going abroad, saving more money, so working a year before starting. So you want to inquire at the time of application if an institution will defer your admission. Typically, we'll defer up to a full academic year. Now, on the backside of that, if you do qualify for scholarships and you want to defer your admission, you need to double check to make sure those scholarships will be there when you start, because sometimes that is not the case. So I always do find some students that are like, well, I deferred my admission and then I don't have any scholarships now, so now I have to apply to another school. So that's something that you want to clarify at the beginning. So submitting your admissions materials. So if you're applying online, make sure to notify your counselor that your transcripts need to be sent. Usually us on the college side will do that for you, but it's always good to double check, especially in these times when everyone is crazy busy. Recommendation. So if you do require a letter of recommendation, make sure you give the recommender enough time to write that, or if they require test scores to be sent directly from a testing facility, or if they can be sent from your high school. Those are two things to consider. Common application. It's one application, multiple schools. So just about every school in the state of Ohio is a Common App member. So that means you're filling out one application and then just marking the institutions that you would like to be included. And then of course, many require college-specific supplements. So of course your transcripts, maybe a test score, a fee or fee waiver, and then recommendation. So just knowing exactly what you need before you apply to make that very smooth and easy for you. Excuse me. So clear and comprehensive recommendations can make the difference in admission. So when you're looking at those selective and highly selective institutions, having a good recommendation helps. So recommenders can typically be teachers, counselors, coaches, advisors, employers, not family members, and not friends. People have tried. So that's why I like to say it. I'm like, really? Okay. Of course, your aunt thinks you're the most precious person in the world, but that's not really an objective opinion. So, and make sure you provide 3 to 4 weeks notice for the recommender to write. a good recommendation, because that's the worst thing you can do is rush somebody into writing a recommendation. I've written several for students that have gone on to like graduate school and law school, and they know the drill. I'm like, how long do I have to write this? You need to at least give me 3 weeks. Give me your resume. So those are things that you want to have prepared for your recommender, maybe your brag sheet and a resume, so they know what to talk about.
How many recommendations is suggested?
It depends on if one is required. I always say it's good to get like 2 or 3. Reason being, you can use them for multiple institutions and you can use them for multiple scholarships. So if you allow the recommender to keep it very broad and not necessarily name institutions unless you want them to, you can actually use it for multiple things, as long as that's okay with your recommender. And then recommendations are reviewed. So they're looking at like comparisons to other students, if it's a teacher, information about the grading schools or competition for grades. Again, that would be maybe a teacher or counselor, personal information. So this is where perhaps if you had any challenges, health issues that may have impacted performance in school, that is interesting to put in there. And then personal traits and study habit information. So these are just recommendations, but typically recommenders that have done it before, they know exactly what to write. So developing a plan to finance your education. This is really crucial. So state and federal government does have opportunities for students to qualify for free financial aid through the financial application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. So this is how you're going to be considered for grants, student loans. Of course, it's a loan, you have to pay it back, and then work study. But the beauty of having grants is you can actually be reviewed for grants from the state and federal government. So that's something like our Pell Grant is our federal. Our Ohio Opportunity Grant is going to be for students in Ohio. So those are things that you definitely want to look into. So student loans, there are 2 types, subsidized and subsidized. One actually collects interest while you're in school, the other one doesn't. So you want the one that doesn't, because then it's going to save you money on the back end. College and university scholarships are always available: academic, leadership, athletics, fine arts. So once you get into some of those performing programs, there might be a competition for scholarship. Each school distributes them in a very unique way. So always ask questions about what that's going to look like. Do you get it all up front? Is it split into 2 semesters? Will it carry you over the summer if you're taking summer classes? So those are important things to ask. And then make sure you research deadlines and requirements to apply for scholarships. Merit awards are typically based on what you submit when you apply. So there's no application, but some supplemental applications might be required for additional scholarships. So you want to review and finalize your plans. Definitely show initiative and be assertive. You're paying for your education. So act like it, right? So you want to get out what you want to get out of your education. So you need to ask the questions, be assertive. I appreciate when I work with students that know exactly what to ask and they know exactly what they want, because that's what I'm paid to do, and they're paying my institution for them to get exactly what they want. So it's nothing wrong with being assertive and showing initiative. I had students that showed initiative, and guess what? They got scholarships that I was able to hand out. So just keep that in mind too. And then have open communication between parents and guardians. So having that open conversation about finances, what you really want to study, what you're passionate about, how far away from home you would like to go. These are all things that you have to talk about, because it's just going to make sure that you find the best fit for you. And then following up with your colleges too. So things that you'll need to do if you're admitted are confirm your enrollment. Typically there is a fee that goes along with that. So that was what we call an enrollment deposit. Orientation, so that's going to be your on-campus or virtual program where you actually get to know your advisor, register for your classes, get your student ID. And then on-campus housing. So do you have to live on campus 1 year? Is it 2 years? Some institutions are 2. So you want to ask if you're moving a little bit further away from home. And then of course, following up on your financial aid. When is it going to be awarded? Are you missing anything that will stop your aid from being packaged? Those are things that you want to adhere to.
At a time when we could all use more pals, the Young Leader Society is starting the Pen Pal Project. This program will provide a way for young professionals throughout Stark County to connect with high school students planning to pursue a college education. Through letters or emails, you can ask them any question you have regarding college and career planning. They'll share with you tips to navigate campus life, excelling in classes, and getting involved with extracurriculars. Sign up today and connect with a young leader this January.